haven't even asked me for my license or registration. You haven't asked me for my license or registration.
Don't break his arm.
Today's video is going to be about Pennsylvania versus Mimms. This is a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court that confirms the fact that a police officer has the authority to order you out of your car when he has you pulled over. Versus Mimms. Pennsylvania versus Mimms is the Supreme Court case that says if an officer pulls you over, has a legitimate reason to stop your vehicle, he is allowed to order you out of that vehicle for any reason that he wants to. Basically what the court said is that if you are driving a vehicle and you are pulled over by the police, you are already detained. Therefore, if an officer asks you to get out of the car, it does not change your detention. You are still detained. The officer doesn't necessarily need a specific reason to pull you out of the car. They don't need probable cause to pull you out of a car. You don't need to be found guilty, or the officer does not believe that you have to believe you're guilty of another crime other than a traffic offense in order to get you out of the car. The officer does not need reasonable, articulable suspicion in order to pull you out of a car. If an officer pulls you over and says, hey, I want you to step out of the car, you have to get out of your car. Those are the rules. That is what Pennsylvania versus Mimms, or well, I always say Pennsylvania versus Mimms. It's Pennsylvania versus Mimms. That's what the court actually said. Now, the reason I'm making this video today, and actually the reason that I started this whole series of constitutional case law type videos, is because of this moron right here, Mike Murphy 7519. I made that video about the deputy, was it down in Tennessee, where he ended up getting in the Mustang with that guy. The guy drove away. He shot and killed the guy in the Mustang, and I called him a dummy for everything that he did, but I went through and said the things that he did right. One of the things I said in that video is that the deputy asked the driver to step out of the car, which he was fully authorized to do. And if you are asked to get out of a car, you have to get out of the car. And the deputy did not need a reason to ask him to get out of the car. Well, that's when dumbass Mike Murphy here came on, says you are wrong about the law. You do not have the right to pull anyone out of a car. You must have an articulable reason to be fearful for your safety. If you don't see a gun, blah, 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 dumbass doesn't know how to read case law. So I said, you're wrong. Pennsylvania versus Mimms. And then he goes on to say, that case clearly states that a police officer can ask you if he has a specific reason to fear for his safety. No, that is not what the court said at all. And as a matter of fact, that is exactly what we're going to be going over today. We will go over what the judges of the Supreme Court actually ruled in Pennsylvania versus Mimms. So Pennsylvania versus Mimms is a Supreme Court case from 1977. I don't remember the date that this incident actually happened because, it takes a while for things to get to the Supreme Court. Often it's years later. But on this particular night, I believe it was a Pennsylvania state trooper pulled over a car, and the guy's last name was Mimms. Pulled over Mr. Mimms for an expired license plate. When they're off to the side of the road, he asks Mr. Mimms to step out of the vehicle. When Mimms gets out of the vehicle, the trooper noticed a bulge in Mimms's jacket. The trooper immediately believed that Mr. Mimms was armed with a violent or a weapon. He believed he had a gun on him. But he said that when he saw the bulge in either his jacket or waistband, I can't remember which one, he clearly believed that this man was armed and that for his own safety, he must pat him down. He then patted him down, found a revolver loaded with 5 rounds on Mr. Mimms's person, placed him under arrest for illegally carrying a concealed weapon. That case went to trial. In trial, there was a motion to suppress the gun evidence, saying that it was an illegal search and seizure, that the officer did not have the right to pull Mimms out of the vehicle, and then also did not have probable cause to search him when he was out of the vehicle. The original court, they refused to suppress the evidence, and Mimms was found guilty of carrying a concealed weapon. Mimms then appealed that to the Pennsylvania state Supreme Court, and they ruled in his favor, said, you know what, this was actually an illegal search. The gun should have been suppressed. Therefore, he should be let out of prison. The state actually took that to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held the case, and they actually found in favor of the state. So they ruled against Mimms in this particular case. So what I like, whoops, I took off the wrong one. What we're going to do is we're going to go through what the justices actually said in this case. And I'm going to pull it up on this screen. That way, I don't know, it matters because I'm looking in the right direction when I'm reading this stuff. So this is an excerpt from the actual decision that was handed down by the justices of the Supreme Court when ruling Pennsylvania versus Mimms. They said the state freely agrees that the officer had no reason to suspect foul play from the particular driver at the time of the stop, there having been nothing unusual or suspicious about his behavior. It was apparently his practice to order all drivers out of the vehicle as a matter of course, whether they had been or when they had stopped, whenever they had been stopped for a violation. So this is the testimony from the state. This is the testimony from the state trooper. They challenged him on, why did you ask this man to get out of the car? And he said, I ask everybody to get out of the car. It's an officer safety issue. Somebody sitting in the car, I can't fully see them. They could be hiding things, concealing things. Also, standing at the driver's side window of a car on the side of the highway is a dangerous spot. I'm afraid that I might get hit. So I make a practice of taking every single driver out of their car during a traffic stop and having them stand at the rear of their vehicle. That is what he said. And the court just erred. I should have made a slide for that. I don't think I did. Oh, I did. So here was the court's response to that. They said, against this important interest, we are asked to weigh the intrusion into the driver's personal liberty occasioned not by the initial stop of the vehicle, which was admittedly justified, but by the order to get out of the car. We think this additional intrusion can only be described as de minimis. The driver is being asked to expose very little more of his person than is already exposed. So one of the things that they did when they challenged this was they said, this is a violation of his Fourth Amendment rights, illegal search and seizure. So the way the court looked at this is said, look, when you're stopped by a police officer for a violation, whether it be a license violation or a moving violation, if he's behind you with his lights and everything on, you're pulled off to the side of the road, that is a detention. And in the view of the Supreme Court and constitutionality, you are under arrest. You are arrested. You are not free to go at that point. Since you're already not free to go, your liberty is already being constrained. The way the Supreme Court looked at it is, listen, you're already being basically arrested on the side of the road. Having you get out of your driver's seat and move behind your car is not a significant level of additional intrusion. Therefore, we're going to say that this is actually constitutional. You're already detained, and an officer asked you to get out of the car. You're only moving a few feet. That is not a violation of your rights. That is what the Supreme Court said. And then they went on furthermore with the officer or the trooper's justification for pulling people out of the car. And he said, I pull everyone out of the car for my own safety. It's an officer safety issue. I don't feel safe with them sitting there. So the court then looked at the evidence and they said, according to one study, approximately 30% of police shootings occur when a police officer approached a suspect seated in an automobile. And then the study is actually listed there. So they're furthermore saying, we think that there is some credence and some weight towards what the officer is saying here. This is a reasonable intrusion. It's a justifiable request. And as a driver, you are required to comply with this officer's order. And here is the reason why. There is little question the officer was justified. Oops. Did I do these out of order? Yes, I did these out of order. We're going to go to this one instead. Nope. We're going to go to this one instead. So we're talking about officer safety, and if the officer feels safe with people sitting in their car versus getting out of their car, and the number of times that officers are assaulted by somebody sitting in the driver's seat of the car, most notably when officers are shot. And they said, we think it too plain for argument that the state's proffered justification, the safety of the officer, is both legitimate and weighty. Certainly, it would be unreasonable to require that police officers take unnecessary risks in the performance of their duties. And what they did here is they referenced Terry v. Ohio. I had every intention of making this video when I made the Terry v. Ohio case, but I thought that it was important to actually cover Terry v. Ohio before we did this one. And then I'm going to go back to this particular one, where it says, there is little question the officer was justified. The bulge in the jacket permitted the officer to conclude that Mimms was armed and thus posed a serious present danger to the safety of the officer. In the circumstances, any reasonable caution would likely have conducted a pat-down. Anywho, I don't know. Sometimes these guys write in weird ways. So here is what the Supreme Court ruled. The Supreme Court said, in short, you're already detained when you're pulled over in your car. The officer has a reason to detain you on the side of the road, so therefore moving you from your driver's seat to outside of your vehicle is not a significant intrusion. Then what they said, because there's two parts to this particular case, there was the pulling him out of the car, whether or not that was legal and justified, and then there was the pat down. When I made my video on Terry v. Ohio, I said that there's actually two parts to Terry v. Ohio, or two results that came from that. One was a Terry stop, where you stop someone where you believe that criminal activity is afoot. And then two, the second part of that is the Terry search or Terry pat down. In order for an officer to be able to pat someone down for weapons, they under Terry, they must have a reasonable suspicion that that person is armed. In the case of Pennsylvania versus Mimms, the officer pulled him out of the vehicle, and in a place where you would normally see a firearm, if somebody was concealing a firearm, he saw a significant bulge. And with his years of experience on the road, he immediately knew that was likely a weapon. So rather than have to stop and ask a bunch of questions or all this other stuff, putting his life and safety in danger, he was able to go ahead and grab onto Mimms, conduct a pat down, and find that weapon. That is what Pennsylvania versus Mimms stated in short. So in closing, I think I said this in the beginning, and I'm going to bring up Dum Dum here as an example again. Close this out. This one. So Mike Murphy, he said, you are wrong about the law. You do not have the right to pull anyone out of a car. You must have a reasonable or an articulable reason to be in fear for your safety. If you do not see a gun, blah, blah, blah. That is incorrect. According to the Supreme Court, an officer can pull anyone out of the car during a traffic stop simply because the officer wants them out of the car. And then the articulable suspicion was that he observed what he believed was a firearm on Mimms. He then conducted a pat-down search, found the firearm, and everything was found to be admissible. So there is your 13-minute breakdown of Pennsylvania versus Mimms. I'll see you guys later.